They said soul stealing was a metaphor, that no one actually takes your voice, your light, your will, that it's just the cost of fame, exhaustion, image, sacrifice. But I was there the night it wasn't a metaphor anymore. The night stepped into a booth that didn't record music, it recorded something else. Something ancient, something watching. What happened in that studio wasn't a session, it was a transaction, and once you see a soul get taken, you never hear silence the same again. So tell me, have you ever seen something you weren't supposed to? A ghost? A ritual? If yes, where? If not, how sure are you? Chapter 1. They said I was just there to observe. They told me to wear black head to toe. No logos, no jewelry, no questions. The van picked me up from a corner store in South Central just after 7 p.m., windows already tinted so dark I couldn't see the driver's eyes. All they said was, "You're backup. Observer only. No engagement unless told." I was 19, fresh off a short-term gig working perimeter at a doctor's shoot. Barely knew how to hold my stance right. But when someone from Death Row Records calls you for a job, especially in '96, you show up. No second thought. You show up and keep your mouth shut. There were 3 of us in the back of that van, all young, all quiet. None of us knew each other and none of us asked names. That was part of it. The man riding shotgun with the clipboard told us one thing before we hit the hills. Don't say a word unless they look at you. Don't ask about who's coming. Don't ask about anything spiritual, especially not that. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. We just nodded. The location wasn't on any GPS. GPS barely existed back then. We took until it got narrow, then veered onto some off-road path hidden by overgrown hedges and a rusted-out guardrail. A gate rose from nowhere, just chain link wrapped in black tarp. No signs, no logos, no lights, but it opened like it had been watching us. Inside was a driveway that dipped under the hill like the house had been built into the earth itself. A single light glowed above a concrete awning, flickering faintly. The man with the clipboard got out first and spoke to someone behind the door. We couldn't see who. Then he waved us forward. "You, door detail, don't let anyone in after 9. Don't let anyone out until it's done." I wanted to ask, done with what? But I kept my mouth shut. The building didn't feel like a studio. It felt like a bunker. Cold air hit us before we even stepped inside. The walls were covered in acoustic foam, but it wasn't the usual kind. This was thicker, darker, like the soundproofing was meant to keep something in, not just keep noise out. There were no windows, no clocks, no labels on any doors. Just hallway after hallway lit by dim overheads that buzzed like they hadn't been replaced in years. When I reached the main room, I expected a mixing console, maybe some speakers. Instead, I saw mirrors covered in black cloth. All of them, every reflective surface in the place was wrapped like a corpse. A long couch faced a glass booth that looked like it had never been used. The mic inside hung too low, like it had been adjusted for someone kneeling. There was only one chair, placed dead center, slightly turned toward the booth. Music played faintly from somewhere, but it wasn't music, just a looping sound. 4 notes, not enough to be a melody, just enough to make you think it was about to start. Then it never did. That's when I heard them say it for the first time. The out-of-town producers en route. No name, no intro, just that. He was coming. Arrived just after 9:15 p.m. I only knew because I saw the car, black BMW, one headlight dimmer than the other. Night was driving. Nobody announced them, they just walked in. Looked off, not weak, just wrong. He had a hoodie pulled tight, eyes hidden, mumbled something under his breath. I caught a piece of it as he passed me. This ain't the room I saw. I didn't know what that meant, but it made the hair on my arms lift. He went straight to the booth and sat down. Didn't say hi to anyone, just sat. Pulled out a cigar, lit it, looked around like he was waiting for someone else. A few other people milled around, quiet guys in suits, no names, no greetings. One of them stared at the black cloth on the mirrors like he wanted to pull it down but didn't dare. The door opened again at 9:41. No announcement, no entourage, just a tall man in white jacket, white shoes, no jewelry, no chain. He walked in like he owned time, like he already knew what had happened and was just here to seal it. That was him. Diddy. Nobody said his name, not once. But every glance turned when he entered. He walked past me, didn't make eye contact, didn't speak. Just stepped up to the booth, looked at and nodded. The clipboard guy tapped my shoulder. "Go seal the doors," he said. "Lock the front, nobody in, nobody out until it's done." "What's done?" He didn't answer, just handed me a key. As I turned to leave, I heard say something low to one of the suited men. "Don't call it a session, call it a rite." That word hit me like ice. I locked the main door. It echoed too loudly, the kind of echo you feel in your ribs. When I got back to the main room, the lights had dimmed. The air was colder. Sat in the booth, not rapping, not singing, just staring straight ahead like he was listening to something only he could hear. Diddy stood beside the console, writing something on a notepad, folded it, tucked it into a black envelope. Nobody else moved. The music looped again. Those 4 notes. Still not a melody. Still waiting to begin. I stood by the exit. They told me not to speak. So I didn't. But in my head, questions started screaming. Why the mirrors? Why no windows? Why the hell is a platinum-selling rapper in a booth with no track? Why does the air feel like it's pushing down? And most of all, what did he mean by, "It's not the right room"? The rest of the night felt like it moved underwater. Every second stretched too long. I remember the out-of-town producer, Diddy, stepping forward once, reaching toward the glass, but not touching it, like he was waiting for permission. Blinked slow, his lips moved. No sound came through. Then he reached up, adjusted the mic an inch lower and exhaled. The loop stopped. Silence fell so hard it hurt. And that's when I knew. Whatever this was, it wasn't a session. It was something else. Something older. They said I was just there to observe. But what I saw that night, what I felt, that wasn't observing. That was witnessing. And I've been trying to forget it ever since. But the truth is, I never really left that room. And that room never stopped watching me. Chapter 2. The studio didn't want music. I remember the cold before anything else. Not the kind of cold that comes from a busted air conditioner or a cracked window. This was different. It moved under your clothes, not through them. It made your fingers tighten, your skin crawl. I kept glancing at the vents, expecting to see them rattling or whirring, but nothing moved. The air was completely still, and somehow getting colder by the second. The studio was built wrong. That's what it felt like. Like it wasn't meant for music, not really. The walls didn't hold sound, they swallowed it. Every footstep disappeared before it echoed. Even our breathing faded out too quickly. I've worked backstage in plenty of small venues before, even helped set up a few underground sessions, but I'd never felt a place trying so hard to mute you. Was already in the booth, hood still up. He hadn't said a word since the out-of-town producer walked in. And now he was fidgeting, fumbling with a lighter, rolling something up tight with a thick pinch of weed. He flicked it once. Nothing. Again. Nothing. Then he leaned back in the chair, lighter in his palm, open flame flickering strong. I watched the way his eyes narrowed. Then he leaned forward, placed the blunt in his mouth, flicked the lighter again. Nothing. The flame vanished the second he crossed the threshold of that mic. He tried a third time. The lighter sparked, caught, burned steady until he tilted it toward the blunt, out again. He looked up at the booth light. Then he looked at me. He didn't speak, didn't have to. The message was clear. The booth wouldn't let him light it. That's when I realized this place didn't want him relaxed. It didn't want him present. It wanted him off. Diddy entered through the side hallway maybe 10 minutes later. He didn't knock, didn't announce himself. He just appeared, like he'd been waiting behind a wall this whole time. Same outfit, white jacket, white pants, white shoes, no watch, no chains. He moved like static before a lightning strike. Smooth but heavy, every step felt like it knew something the rest of us didn't. He didn't speak to anyone. Not even. He walked up to the soundboard and stood there, hands behind his back, eyes on the glass. Like he was watching an exhibit. Didn't notice him at first, or maybe he did and just didn't care. He kept trying to mess with the headphones, adjusting the cord like something was wrong. Then he sighed and sat back. The flickering began then. Subtle. One green light on the board blinked twice, then all of them pulsed, as if someone had tapped play. But none of us had touched the board. Nothing was wired in. No tape deck, no computer, no DAT. Just analog meters flickering to a beat that didn't exist. That's when leaned in, whispered something in Diddy's ear. I couldn't hear it, but I saw the way Diddy's lips curled slightly. Then clapped him on the shoulder and left the room. No nod to anyone else. Now it was just us. Looked over finally, saw Diddy standing there. Their eyes met. But there was no recognition, not like artist to producer, not like men with history. It was colder than that. Like one was checking if the other was still there. Pac lifted the headphones, placed them on. That was the first moment I felt the air shift. Not cooler, not heavier, just different. Like a layer of the world had peeled off and something older was watching now. Diddy didn't move, still standing behind the board. No one sat down. Nobody else spoke. Just the soft loop of those 4 notes playing again. That same broken, unfinished melody. Except now, it sounded slower. Like it was waiting. Leaned into the mic. Didn't say anything at first. It just breathed. You know how sometimes an artist will pause to find the right bar? That wasn't this. This was a pause that didn't belong to him. It was like the booth wanted to exhale first. Then Pac spoke. But before his voice came out, the mic echoed. I swear to God, the mic echoed before he said a word. Like it already knew. Like it had heard him before. And not from rehearsal, from somewhere else. He blinked hard, sat back, looked around the booth like he suddenly didn't know where he was. But he kept going. Freestyle, low muttered, lines about death, about being hunted, about body doubles, about masks and blood oaths and being too deep in to climb back out. No beat, no hook. Just a man unspooling. Diddy didn't blink. Didn't nod. Didn't move. He just watched. Then everything shut down. The soundboard lights died. The loop stopped. The room dropped into dead silence. For a second, I thought the power had cut. Then I saw it. On the backup LED, right above the mixer, burned into red block letters like a warning on a submarine. Recording right begun. Not recording. Not live. Right. Alright, Diddy. It didn't look digital. It looked carved. The kind of font they use in horror movies when someone finds an altar. I tried to move, but my legs felt like they didn't belong to me. Like the floor beneath us wasn't holding us anymore. Like gravity had changed. This voice came through the booth again. But it wasn't the same. Softer, slower, doubled. His mouth moved once, and two voices played through the speakers. One his, the other not. Deeper off-key, like it had been and warped. Diddy finally stepped forward, lifted his hand, pressed two fingers against the glass. And Pac went quiet. Mid-bar, mid-syllable. He just stopped, like someone had flipped his switch. He sat back in the chair, eyes open, not blinking, not breathing heavy, just still. The LED kept flashing. Recording right begun. The meters didn't move. No sound. No air. No feeling. I think that's when I understood. The studio didn't want music. It never did. It wanted agreement. It wanted submission. It wanted a voice to stop being a voice and become something it could own. I backed toward the wall, hand on my radio. No static. No signal. Every channel was dead. I turned to look at the hallway. The one had walked down. Gone. Just a black wall. Like it had never been there. The overhead light buzzed once. Pulsed red. Then white. Then red again. And stood up. Walked to the booth door. Paused. Turned to the mic one more time. Said something I couldn't hear. Then opened the door and walked out. Diddy followed. Didn't look at me. Didn't look at anyone. Just left. Like the job was done. That was the last time I saw Pac alive. 3 days later, they said he got shot in Vegas. Was there. But I know that ain't where he died. Because whatever left that booth, it wasn't all of him. Chapter 3, they asked him to sing something from his childhood. It started with a question, so soft I didn't even hear it at first. I was standing near the booth door trying to act like I belonged there, like I was still part of security and not just some kid way too deep into something I was never trained to witness. The lights were red again, dim but sharp, like they'd been soaked in blood and never cleaned. The studio still had that hum to it, not from any equipment but from the walls themselves, like the place breathed wrong. And then I heard Diddy's voice. Hum it. He didn't say it loud, didn't say it like a demand, just like he already knew the answer. Pac stayed quiet. He was back in the booth again, headphones loose around his neck, slumped forward like gravity wanted more from him than everyone else. He glanced up toward the soundboard but didn't meet anyone's eyes, not even Diddy's. Diddy stepped closer to the glass, just far enough to keep the reflection from showing him fully. He repeated it just once. Hum something she used to sing. And this time we all knew who she was. His mother. There was a long pause, maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute, but it felt longer than that. Felt like the studio went outside of time for a while and came back tired. Pac sat back, rubbed his eyes, and mumbled something none of us could hear. Then, slow, resigned, like a man halfway between anger and surrender, he closed his eyes. And he hummed. At first it was low, just a broken trail of notes, unpolished, rough like it hadn't left his throat in over a decade. The kind of melody that wasn't meant for performance, it was meant for protection. Something a mother sings not because it's beautiful, but because it works, keeps the dark back, if only for a few hours. The second he started, the temperature dropped. And I don't mean it got a little cold. I mean the air fell. Like it had weight. Like it was coming down on us. I felt it hit the back of my neck first, then in my hands, then in my chest. It wasn't the kind of cold that makes you shiver. It was the kind that makes your bones go quiet, like your body's remembering something ancient. My ears started ringing. A high-pitched whine right above audible range, not loud but pressurized, like the air itself had a headache. I looked up. The mirrors, the ones wrapped in black cloth, they started shaking. Only slightly. Just enough to make the cloth twitch like it had breath underneath. No sound, no earthquake, nothing else moved. Just the mirrors. Like they wanted to show us something, but couldn't quite pull the sheets off. He kept humming. Eyes still closed. But something was changing in his voice. It started to split. At first, it sounded like his throat had caught, like a harmony was slipping in by accident. But it didn't stop. It deepened. And then it duplicated. One hum his. One underneath it, lower, distorted, like an echo coming from behind a wall underwater. It wasn't human. It wasn't even musical. It was a sound pretending to be a voice. And Diddy smiled. He pulled out a slip of paper from his jacket. Wrote something carefully, slowly, his hand steady even as Pac's voice started breaking into two distinct layers. Then he folded the paper once, twice, slid it into a black envelope, sealed it with something I didn't recognize, some kind of ash-colored wax pressed by his thumb. He held it for a moment, just long enough to make me think he was going to hand it to someone. But he didn't. He placed it on the mixing console, right next to the master fader. And the mic started glowing. It wasn't sudden, not dramatic. Just a faint red halo around the capsule, barely visible unless you were staring at it. But I was. It pulsed like a heartbeat, slow, steady, matching the rhythm of the hum. And that's when stopped. Mid-phrase, mid-note. He opened his eyes. And for the first time that night, I saw him scared. Not nervous, not unsettled, scared. Like he'd remembered something he was never supposed to forget. The booth light flickered. The LED readout changed again. But not to anything I could read. Just symbols. They looked like text that had been from a dream, bent backward and almost familiar. Some looked like letters, some didn't. Diddy leaned closer to the glass, placed 2 fingers on it, and whispered. He said yes, even if you didn't. Flinched, backed away from the mic. Eyes wide, mouth open like he was about to speak, but didn't. Couldn't. The humming didn't stop. Even after he pulled off the headphones. Even after he backed into the corner of the booth like he wanted the walls to take him somewhere else. The hum stayed. Deep echoed not through the speakers but through the walls. Like the studio had picked up the melody now. Like it had made a copy. And it liked how it felt. I moved without meaning to. My body took a step forward. Like I could stop it. Like I could make it normal again. But Diddy turned his head slightly, just enough to see me from the corner of his eye, and shook his head. One slow movement. I stopped. My hands were cold, my throat burned. And when I looked down, I swear my walkie was melting. Not visibly, not dripping, but I could feel it, like the plastic had turned to tar in my grip. I dropped it. It didn't make a sound when it hit the floor. Sat down again. Hard. Like his legs had forgotten what they were for. And Diddy. He walked away. Didn't say another word. Didn't take the envelope. Didn't look back. Just disappeared into the hallway that hadn't been there 10 minutes ago. And I knew what had happened wasn't a performance. It wasn't even a deal. It was a receipt. They'd taken something. And Pac had helped them do it. Even if he didn't mean to. Even if he was just trying to survive one more session, one more night, one more favor called in from someone he couldn't say no to. They asked for a memory. They got a soul. And I still hear it sometimes. That hum, in walls that shouldn't echo, in places where no music is playing. And if I ever hear it in my sleep, I don't wake up. Not right away. Because the studio, it's still open. It's just looking for the next voice. Chapter 4, I was told to stand inside the circle. They told me not to speak, not to ask, not to look too long. But they didn't say anything about delivering water. That's how it started. Clipboard guy reappeared in the corner like he'd melted out of the walls. He didn't even say my name, just held up a bottle, pointed at the booth. Take it to him, don't step outside the chalk. I blinked chalk. He said it again, slower this time. Don't step outside the chalk. He didn't wait for me to answer, just turned and vanished into the hallway again. I grabbed the water and made my way to the booth. The light above the door pulsed, red, then a dull gray, then red again, not blinking, breathing. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The temperature changed immediately. Not colder, heavier. The air felt thick, like it had shape, like if I moved too fast, I'd tear it. Pac was sitting in the corner, hands folded over his knees. Not praying, not thinking, just still, like he'd been poured into the floor. I stepped forward, holding the water out. That's when I saw it. The chalk. It wasn't just a ring. It was etched. Not like sidewalk chalk, not that clean. This was jagged, ritualistic. Symbols mixed in with broken lines, numbers written upside down, letters turned sideways like they were meant for something else to read. It circled the entire mic stand, wide enough for one person to move inside without touching the edge. I froze just outside it, and then looked up at me. His eyes weren't glassy, they weren't blank. They were awake, like something inside him had never blinked once since the humming started. He reached up and grabbed my arm tight. You don't feel that? His voice was low, real low, lower than I'd ever heard it. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. He leaned in, whispering, like he thought something might be listening from the other side of the glass. That's not a booth, he said. It's a box. My heart was thudding in my ears now, not fast, hard. I handed him the bottle without stepping into the circle. Just leaned forward, arms stretched, careful not to drag my foot. He took it without looking, and still held my wrist. "You gotta leave before it starts," he whispered. "What starts?" I finally asked. He didn't answer. His grip loosened, and I backed away. I turned to open the booth door, and that's when Diddy walked in. He didn't come from the hallway. He didn't open the door. He just entered, like he was always supposed to be there, and the space had just finally caught up. His hands were behind his back. He said nothing. He walked straight past me and stepped inside the circle. No hesitation, no pause, just precision. The moment his foot crossed the line, the entire booth vibrated. Not the walls, not the ground. The air. It pressed inward, like a vacuum, like altitude sickness, like we were too high and too deep at the same time. My ears popped. I staggered back, and the booth door slammed shut. I didn't touch it. I swear I didn't. It closed with a thud that didn't echo, just collapsed into itself. Outside, the lights dimmed, not flickered, dimmed, like they were reacting to breath instead of power. Inside, Diddy raised his arms just slightly, palms out facing Pac. Still not speaking. Still not blinking. And then, he chanted. It didn't sound like any language I knew. It wasn't even words. It was layers. Like audio played backwards, like vinyl warped by heat, like monks mixed with static. Each syllable felt like it scratched something under my skin. Like my bones were being tuned. Pac's hands dropped to his sides. His knees bent. And he lowered. Not fainted. Just lowered. Like gravity had changed for him, but not for the rest of us. Like something had put a hand on his head and pressed, gently. The symbols on the chalk ring began to smolder. Faint orange at first, then red, but no smoke. Just light, pulsing, beating, breathing. Diddy kept chanting, each word slower than the last, drawn out like silk, unraveling in the dark. Looked up, his face pale now, sweat lining his brow, lips parted. He whispered something. I couldn't hear it, but Diddy did, because that's when he smiled. A full smile. No charm. Just victory. And then, blackout. Every light in the studio cut off. Every monitor. Every bulb. The hallway, the booth, even the emergency exit sign. Gone. Just black. And we sat in it. For 11 seconds. I counted. Not with a clock. With my heartbeat. 11 seconds of nothing. Not even breath. Just dark. Then the lights came back. Not all at once. Slow. Dim at first. Like the building was trying to remember what it looked like. I ran to the booth door. Yanked it open. Was still kneeling. Diddy was gone. Gone. Like the chalk. Because that was gone too. The whole circle. Erased. No smudge. No dust. No scorch marks. Just clean floor. Pac didn't look up, didn't speak, didn't blink, just knelt there facing the mic. I moaned. I backed out of the booth and closed the door. Didn't lock it. Didn't need to. Whatever had just happened in there, it didn't need walls anymore. Back in the main room, the black envelope was gone. So was the console tape. So was Clipboard Guy. I was alone. Except for the loop. The 4-note loop. Playing again. Not louder, but closer. Like it was behind my eyes now. Like it had learned me. And that was the moment I knew. I wasn't the observer anymore. I was part of it now. Like he said, that's not a booth, it's a box. And I stepped inside. Chapter 5, whatever left the room, it wasn't him. Stepped out of the booth like he had aged a decade in the span of minutes. His movements were slow but deliberate, as if he had to think about each one before executing it. And though there was the faintest suggestion of a smile on his face, it was the kind of smile that didn't quite make it to his eyes. They remained unfocused, glassy, distant, not scanning the room but moving across it as though following something only he could see. I had never seen him look like that. The man who could command an entire room with nothing but his breath now moved through the air like he wasn't sure it would hold him. Everyone else stayed still. The studio had fallen into one of those strange silences you don't even notice until it's too thick to ignore. Even the faint mechanical hum of the lights seemed to bow out, as if the room itself was waiting to see what would happen next. Diddy was gone. No one saw him leave, no footsteps, no door creaked, no parting glance. One moment he was there, humming something ancient under his breath, his hands behind his back like he'd been conducting a private sermon. The next, there was simply space where he had been standing, not a trace left behind, not a word, just absence thick, and the studio didn't seem relieved, just quieter. It was as if Diddy had taken the sound with him, and then Knight walked in, as casual as if he just stepped out for a smoke break. He moved straight toward Pac, slapped him on the back like they had just wrapped a music video, like nothing strange had happened, like the studio hadn't just pulsed and changed shape under some ancient ritual they refused to name. "Solid, bro," was all he said. Just those two words, like the night had gone off without a hitch. But behind him the air still smelled wrong, ozone, metallic, like old batteries soaked in rainwater. It hit the back of my throat with the sharp tang of something unnatural, and I tried to cough it out without drawing attention. That didn't feel like a successful session. It felt like something had just been taken out of the room and none of us knew what yet. Went and sat down in the side lounge to talk. I slipped away down the back hallway and made a straight line for the security console. I needed to know what I'd seen. I needed proof that I hadn't just hallucinated the red light, the chalk circle, the backwards chanting that had dug its way through my bones like a tuning fork. The camera system was old school, a tape loop setup rigged to 4 corners of the room, one in the booth, 2 on the walls near the console, and 1 aimed at the hallway. Every single one had been blinking green before the ritual started. I had checked them myself. But when I pulled the tape for review, my hands shook before I even hit play. Something in my gut was already telling me what I'd find. I rewound the footage, watching the timeline spin back 30, 40 minutes. The monitors flickered, held steady for a second, and then collapsed into static. Not grainy black and white interference. This was different. White static, bright and sharp, like someone had taped over the feed with a bad signal from another dimension. And beneath the static, faint but unmistakable, came the whispering. No language I'd ever heard. Not even a voice, really, just suggestion like thoughts that didn't belong to you brushing against the edges of your mind. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt my fingers go numb around the eject button. I pulled the tape out, tucked it into my jacket, and made myself breathe. If nothing else, I needed to remember this night, even if nobody else wanted it remembered. I found myself standing beneath a flickering light that cast more shadow than glow, trying to steady my hands long enough to open a soda. I thought maybe something cold, something carbonated would bring me back into my body, but when I turned around, was already there. He was seated at the tiny table, head bowed slightly, scrawling something on a napkin with a thick black Sharpie. I didn't even see him come in. The hum of the vending machine had covered whatever footsteps he'd made. I opened my mouth to speak, to ask if he was all right, but he didn't give me the chance. He stood up, walked toward me, and without looking me in the eyes, slipped the napkin into my jacket pocket and walked past me. No words, no warning, no explanation. I turned to follow him, to ask him what it meant, but by the time I reached the door, he had already disappeared into the hallway again. A phantom. A shadow of the person who had walked into that booth earlier tonight. Back in the main studio, the lights had returned to normal. The red pulse was gone. The chalk circle on the floor, erased, without a trace, like it had never existed. Even the air felt clearer now, as though whatever had been invited in had finally taken what it came for. The staff began returning. Sound techs muttering about scheduling, assistants carrying water and empty folders, clipboard guy nodding like we had all just finished another long night of tracking vocals. Nobody talked about what had happened. Nobody even hinted. It was like they'd rehearsed how to forget. They moved through the studio like people who'd seen nothing, like they were wiping clean not just the boards, but their memories too. I didn't go home right away. I stayed there on the edge of the lot under a busted exit sign that buzzed faintly overhead, watching and climbed back into the same black BMW that brought them in. It was still running, still idling like it had never been turned off. Rolled his window halfway down and turned his head toward me. Our eyes met for just a second. And in that second, something inside me turned to ice, because the man staring back at me had the same face. The same jawline, the same shaped body, but the light behind his eyes, gone. Like the driver was still in the seat, but someone else had taken over the wheel. That was the last time I saw him in person. Hours later, I got a call, a page, 6 numbers, 911. I waited for a follow-up, but it never came. I tried to dial the number back, but it rang once and went dead. The next morning, I showed up to the death row office, trying to get anyone to explain what I had witnessed. The receptionist smiled like I was there to deliver a pizza. "Oh, hey," she said brightly. "Yeah, you're good. They said your services aren't needed anymore." No follow-up, no questions. Just like that, I was erased. And it felt like the most natural thing in the world to her. Like people were removed all the time and no one ever asked why. Later that day, it was all over the news. Had been shot in Las Vegas, riddled with bullets at a red light just off the strip. Had taken a bullet to the head, but he was expected to recover. Pac, they said, was in critical condition, but I already knew. They were lying, not because they were trying to protect the investigation, but because the thing in that car was any more. The man who had exited that booth, eyes vacant, humming something too old to have a melody. He had already been emptied out. What died in Vegas was the body. The rest had been left behind on that studio floor. That night, I finally pulled the napkin out of my jacket pocket. The Sharpie ink had smudged, like the words had been written in a rush. But I could still read it clearly. "If they take it, don't speak it, but don't forget what you saw." No name, no signature, just that one sentence, and I've lived by it ever since. Because there's more of them. More studios, more microphones in more boxes waiting to capture not talent but memory, spirit, presence. There are people on stages right now mouthing along to voices that don't belong to them. Every time I hear a posthumous track, every time an old vocal resurfaces with new production and a different energy, I think about that night. I think about the hum, the chant, the moment the lights went out and the mic started glowing like a beacon. And I wonder how many of them are still carrying pieces of someone else inside their voice. How many of them got handed a contract sealed with wax instead of ink? People ask me all the time where I was when died. They mean Vegas. I never correct them. Because the truth is, I watched him disappear 3 nights earlier in a soundproofed bunker under the Hollywood Hills, beneath lights that only turned red when the doors were locked and the chalk had been drawn. Whatever left that room, it wasn't him. It wore his face, it walked in his shoes, and maybe, just maybe, it still raps in someone's basement today. But it's not him. And I haven't forgotten what I saw. Chapter 6. The footage that rewrote itself. 2 days after was shot, I went back to the studio. Not out of curiosity, not even grief. It was something deeper. Like a string had been tied around my spine that night, and now someone was tugging it, slowly, steadily, reeling me back toward a place my body knew better than to revisit. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't even take my own car. I borrowed my cousin's old Civic with the busted passenger door and drove out to the hills with nothing but the jacket I wore that night and the napkin still folded in the inside pocket. The streets were different in daylight, less threatening somehow, but that feeling faded fast as I approached the turnoff. The gate that once guarded the driveway, gone, like it had never existed. I drove right past the spot 3 times before realizing the driveway was still there, just erased. Overgrown and dusty like no one had been through in months, let alone days. When I finally parked and made my way down the gravel incline toward where the studio should been, my stomach dropped. The building wasn't there, not fully. The structure was still intact, the concrete shell of it, but everything inside had been gutted. No furniture, no soundboards, no cameras, just scorched cables hanging from cracked walls and blackened patches on the floor like something had caught fire, not with flames, but with heat, controlled heat, focused. Like the room itself had been cauterized. Every surface that once held memory was now burned into silence. It didn't smell like smoke. It smelled like power that had overstayed its welcome. I walked through the ruined hallways like a trespasser in my own memory, each step echoing too loudly in rooms that used to pulse with sound. The lounge where clapped pack on the back like everything was fine, empty. The booth, door torn off, glass shattered inward like someone had tried to escape it from the inside. But the floor caught my eye first. There were marks, black rings, burned into the concrete where the chalk circle used to be. No residue, no debris. Just charred outlines, symmetrical and cruelly precise. Whatever had been drawn there had melted through the tile and left a scar beneath it. The mic stand was gone, but in its place sat a single nail driven halfway into the floor, bent to one side. I couldn't breathe. The air in that room tasted like a lie someone forgot to bury. I stumbled back into the hallway and made my way to the admin room where the security console had been. The monitor was still there, barely. The screen was cracked, but the deck was intact. I powered it up. It sputtered, made a high-pitched whine, then lit up with a blinking green cursor. I didn't expect it to work. I expected dust, maybe static, but the terminal booted. The menu blinked to life, and the files were still there, except now they were all renamed. No timestamps, no file sizes, just variations of the same phrase. Write complete Tier 1. Over and over and overs. There were 13 of them. I clicked the first one. It played backwards. Not just the audio, the entire clip. I watched as Diddy walked in reverse out of the booth, a smile on his face that lingered too long, like it had been stuck there, like it wasn't his. His hands were behind his back, the envelope tucked under his arm, and as he moved, his eyes looked directly into the camera, even though it was supposed to be a candid hallway feed. The smile didn't flicker. The eyes didn't blink. I stopped the video and clicked the second. This one had no video at all. Just audio. It was his voice, repeating the same phrase. Let me out. Over and over. Not loud, not screaming, just steady, like a chant, a mantra. Like someone stuck in a loop. I played another file. The same result. The words layered this time, distorted under a high-frequency buzz that made my temples ache. The screen began flickering. The speakers popped. The cursor blinked red. I reached for the power button, but the screen flashed once more, this time with a frame I hadn't seen before. Just a single still shot. The studio room, empty, but with the outline of a person crouched in the far corner. A shadow with no source. A shape without identity. I shut the terminal down and backed away. But I didn't leave. Because I hadn't come for video. I'd come for the tape. And it was waiting for me. When I got back to my apartment that evening, there was a package on my doorstep. No label, no return address. Just a plain brown envelope taped shut with masking tape, edges frayed like it had been handled too many times by too many hands. I didn't touch it for 5 minutes, just stared at it like it might move. When I finally opened it, I found a single cassette inside, old, unlabeled, the kind you find in shoeboxes in your grandfather's garage, covered in dust and regret. I popped it into my tape deck. It hissed for a moment. Then it began to play. It was Pac's voice, no doubt, but not a track I recognized, not something from the albums. This was raw, like a demo, a verse unpolished, unfinished, but beneath it, beneath his cadence, beneath the rhythm, there were whispers, deep, dissonant, almost out of sync. They weren't ad-libs, they weren't doubles, they were wrong, like something else had been layered under his vocal chain, a voice trying to breathe through his words. At first it was subtle, then it got louder. And louder. And louder. Until I couldn't hear Pac at all. Just static and syllables too malformed to belong to any human throat. I ripped the tape out. My hands were shaking. I felt sick, like the sound had infected something behind my ears, not a headache, something deeper, like nausea in my bones. I held the tape up to the light, trying to find a clue, a marking, anything that would explain what I had just heard. That's when I saw it. Etched into the inside of the cassette shell, scratched into the plastic from the inside out like it had been written with a razor. That wasn't the real death. 7 words. A sentence no one should ever find by accident. I threw the cassette into the drawer, slammed it shut, and sat down hard on the edge of the bed, trying to slow my breathing. I knew what it meant. Pac's body had died in Vegas. But what was killed in that booth? What was buried in those whispers? That was something else entirely. And I wasn't sure it ever left the studio. Or maybe it did. Maybe it followed the tape. Maybe it's in the sound now. Every time someone plays his voice. Every time a verse hits the airwaves and the bass thumps and the crowd cheers. Maybe something's listening. Maybe something's feeding. Maybe something never stopped. I still have the napkin. Still folded in the same jacket pocket. Still unread by anyone else. Because I know what it means now. If they take it, don't speak it. It wasn't about silence. It was about containment. About not letting it echo. Not letting it multiply. Not letting it use you to spread. But me, I remember. I've never forgotten. And the sound, it never left my ears. Chapter 7, I think I know what soul theft sounds like. It started slowly. First, it was just little things, random snippets of voice where it didn't belong. I'd be standing in an elevator alone and the intercom would crackle before announcing the floor, and for a split second I'd swear I heard Pac humming. Not lyrics, just tone, breath, like the air remembered him. Then it was the radio, songs I'd heard 100 times, suddenly layered with a vocal that hadn't been there before, a harmony that wasn't part of the track. At first I thought I was losing it. I told myself it was grief, a psychological echo of someone I'd witnessed vanish into a ritual no one else seemed to remember. But it kept happening, even in silence. That was the worst part. Sometimes I'd be in my apartment late at night, no sound at all, just the fridge clicking on every few minutes, the hum of the city outside, and I'd hear it. Not in the air, in my head, but not inside my thoughts either. Like it was hiding between my nerves, a presence not trying to be heard but trying to exist through me. His voice whispering syllables that didn't match any verse he'd written. Sometimes words, sometimes something older, something with no language at all, just feeling. The dreams came next. At first they were disjointed images, flashes of the studio, the booth, the red light above the door. The chalk circle burned into the floor, but then they changed. In the dreams, the booth wasn't above ground anymore. It had been moved, sunken into the dirt, surrounded by walls made of mirrors, breathing mirrors. They pulsed in and out like lungs, fogging slightly every time I exhaled inside the dream. I could see myself reflected 1,000 times, but only one version of me moved. The others just stared. And behind them, always behind them, was the shape, the figure I had seen on the corrupted tape. The crouched outline in the corner of the room. Only in the dream it stood, and when it stood, the mirrors cracked. I woke up in a sweat every time. One morning, after a particularly vivid one, I opened the closet to grab an old hoodie and noticed something I hadn't seen in years, my death row jacket. The same one I wore that night. I didn't remember bringing it home. I don't remember ever getting it back after they let me go. But there it was, hung neatly, clean, like someone had been taking care of it. I pulled it off the hanger and slipped my hand into the inside pocket, and that's when I felt it. A small, brittle shape. Like a folded note that had been left too close to heat. I pulled it out. It was a black envelope, torn across the top. Identical to the one I had seen Diddy carry that night into the booth. I held my breath as I opened it, no paper inside, just ashes, fine, weightless. They didn't fall out, they drifted, like they were trying to avoid the air. I touched them once and my fingertip tingled for hours after. I tried to throw it away. I couldn't. I don't know if it was fear or instinct, but I couldn't drop it into the trash. It felt like an artifact. Like something you weren't allowed to destroy without permission. That afternoon, I got a knock on my door. A man stood in the hallway, middle-aged, weathered, like someone who had lived through too many deadlines and smoked too many cigarettes. He didn't give a name, just looked me in the eye and said, "They don't kill you, they archive you." He said it like a greeting, like it was something I already knew. I asked him what he meant. He didn't repeat it, just handed me a thumb drive and walked away. I watched him through the peephole until he got into a cab and vanished. I locked the door behind me, turned off all the lights, and plugged the drive into my old laptop. At first it was empty. No folders, no documents, just a single audio file named, that's it, 2 underscores. I hit play. It was me. My own voice. From the booths. That night. But it wasn't what I remembered saying. It was like my words had been rerouted. Like my voice had been passed through something else and come back layered, echoed, distorted. Beneath it, another voice, identical in tone but off in timing, slightly behind me, slightly ahead, mimicking, responding, syncing. I felt cold all over, not from fear, from realization. The voice wasn't duplicating me, it was replacing me. Since that day, every time I've tried to talk about what happened, to a friend, a stranger, even into my own recorder, something goes wrong. Audio glitches, lights flicker. Phone batteries drain out of nowhere. I tried to write it all out on a forum once and the site crashed mid-post. Every method of documenting that night seems to fight back. Not violently, not loudly, just consistently, like something has put up a firewall between me and the memory. And each time I try to push through it, the resistance gets stronger. Not externally, internally, like my own nervous system is complicit. I started watching old interviews, media clips, trying to find some proof that Diddy was even there that night. But every time the question came up, he'd dodge it. Say he wasn't in LA that week. Say he was in New York. Say he was with family. And somehow no journalist ever pressed him. It was always glossed over, dismissed, like everyone was in on the game and no one wanted to spoil the ending. But then I found a photo, grainy from a behind-the-scenes shoot outside a different death row session weeks before Pac died. And in the background, reflected in a van window, was my face, looking directly at the camera. I don't remember being there. I've never even seen that session. But there I was, mouth slightly open, eyes wide, as if I'd just seen something I wasn't supposed to. My laptop started to fail soon after that. Files disappearing. Folders renaming themselves. System logs rewritten. And all the folders where I kept anything remotely connected to that night started flashing the same tag. Witness level 2, record locked. I hadn't written that. No program could even generate that kind of tag. I tried wiping the drive. The prompt wouldn't respond. Tried formatting the system. It wouldn't reboot. The machine had decided what I could and couldn't remember. I left the apartment for a few days. Stayed with a friend out in the desert. Didn't tell them why, just said I needed air. Quiet. While I was there, I brought a small tape player. I don't know why. Maybe I thought distance would make the sound less dangerous. Maybe I thought the desert couldn't be haunted. One night, I played the cassette from the envelope again. The one with Pac's final verse layered under whispers. Only this time, something new played first. A voice. Calm, neutral. It said, "You watched a transfer. Now it's your turn." Then the tape self-ejected. And when I tried to rewind it, nothing. The tape was blank. There's a term in archiving, ghost data. Fragments of deleted files that still exist in the deep sectors of a drive, invisible to most systems but recoverable with the right tools. I think that's what I've become. Ghost data. A fragment of a moment they tried to delete. And I don't think they ever expected me to hold this much of the memory. Maybe that's why they haven't erased me completely. Not yet. They're waiting to see what I do with it. Waiting to see if I hand it over willingly. And sometimes, I swear, I feel it crawling back in. The booth, the chanting, the mirrors, the breath that wasn't mine. Ant's voice underneath it all. Still whispering, still asking, "Let me out." Chapter 8, you can't unsee a soul being taken. I set up the camera like I'd done 100 times before. Nothing fancy, just an old camcorder, tripod, dim lamp in the corner. I even wrote out what I was going to say. It wasn't for views, it wasn't for evidence. It was a confession, not to law enforcement, not to the press, but to myself. I needed to say it all out loud. I needed to hear my own voice speak the truth back to me. I pressed record, looked directly into the lens and said, "This is about." That's when the camera died. Instant. No warning. Just black screen, red light off, battery full but dead. I tried 3 more times, changed batteries, swapped SD cards, even tried my phone. Same result. The moment I said, the device shut down. It didn't matter if I whispered, didn't matter if I spelled the name. Any attempt to speak about that night aloud, to name what happened in that studio, triggered something I couldn't override. It wasn't censorship, it wasn't a glitch, it was enforcement. And that's when I realized I hadn't been telling my story. I'd been playing inside someone else. Later that evening, I went to the bathroom and caught my reflection lagging behind. At first I thought it was the light. Maybe my eyes were tired. But no, When I moved, blinked, turned my head, my reflection followed with a 1-second delay, just long enough to feel deliberate, just long enough to feel watched. I stared into the mirror, holding eye contact with myself for what felt like minutes, and the longer I looked, the less sure I became that the face looking back was still entirely mine. That night, I dreamed of Diddy again. But it was Diddy. It was a version of him that moved too smoothly, spoke too calmly, like someone who'd had their body hollowed out and filled with something patient. He didn't chase me, didn't threaten me. He just stood in the booth, hands behind his back, smiling that same smile I saw the night it happened. He said yes, he whispered. Why won't you? I woke up with blood on my pillow. Nosebleed maybe, or maybe something else. I didn't want to check. I just laid there, breathing hard, ears ringing, staring at the ceiling like it might blink. That morning I checked a voicemail I didn't remember getting. My own voice, talking slowly, a whisper beneath it layered in, and I wasn't saying what I meant to say. The message didn't make sense. It wasn't a sentence, it was a feeling, a warning, but I couldn't understand it because I wasn't the one who left it. I just borrowed the voice. That's when I started reviewing old recordings, calls, memos, random notes, and in every one there was something new layered under my tone. Just faint enough to question, just clear enough to know it was there. I tried deleting them, they came back. I shut off the phone, it turned itself back on. Then the text started. At first I thought it was spam. The numbers were always different, but the message was always the same. Return to the booth, seal the track. I blocked the number, another one replaced it. Different area code, same words, no punctuation, always at 3:06 a.m. every single night. The letters came next. No return address, no stamp, just an envelope on my windowsill despite the fact that I lived on the 3rd floor. Inside was a photo. Old, grainy, the studio booth, the chalk circle, the red light, and in the center, just visible, the bent nail I'd seen lodged into the floor after the ritual. On the back, a single line in tight cursive. That room doesn't forget. And I knew it was true, not just the studio, the ritual. The room had a memory, and that memory had a pulse. It lived in the sound, in the footage, in the things I had carried home in my pockets, in my voice, in my dreams. I made the decision that day to disappear. No fanfare. No announcement. I packed light, just the essentials, burned every file I had, factory reset every device, wiped everything clean, or so I thought. Because when I opened the backpack I hadn't used since that week, there it was. Another cassette. Blank labels. No case. Just marker ink bleeding through the plastic shell. The real final session. I didn't remember packing it, I didn't even remember owning it, but it was mine now. And I knew even before I put it into the deck that I was going to play it. I had to. Not because I wanted to hear it, but because it had been waiting for me to be ready. That's how these things work. They wait. They listen. And when you break just enough to forget who you used to be, they ask for a track to seal it. I cleared a space in the center of the room, turned off the lights, sat on the floor, and pressed play. The tape didn't start with sound. It started with temperature. The air got colder, thicker, like fog without the fog, like pressure without weight. Then came the static. Low at first, then sharper, then Pac's voice, softer than I'd ever heard it, almost like he was whispering through cloth. There were no lyrics, no bars, just breath and syllables, and something like a question on the edge of a memory that never belonged to him. And then the whisper came back. The same phrase. Every time. One voice layered beneath his, sometimes behind, sometimes ahead, repeating like a metronome. He said, "Yes, why won't you?" The room started to flicker. Not the bulb. The room. Corners pulsing red. Walls vibrating like old speakers. I could feel the nails in the floor beneath the carpet. Hear the circle drawing itself around me in chalk I couldn't see. And then silence. Total. Not the absence of sound. The eviction of it. Even my breathing felt muted. I reached for the cassette, fingers shaking. And as I touched it, just before it ejected, the red light in the corner of my room blinked on. Just once, then stayed. That's where this story ends. Not with a bang, not with a confession, but with a question. How much of you is still yours? Because once you've seen a soul get taken, once you've watched someone say no and get anyway, you start to wonder if your choices were ever your choices to begin with. If your voice has always been yours. If your dreams are your own. Or if maybe, just maybe, you've been humming someone else's song this whole time. The tape stopped playing. But I haven't. I still feel it spinning in the back of my mind. Still feel the mic dangling just above my breath. I still feel the circle. I still feel the eyes. I still feel him. Diddy. But not Diddy. Something older wearing his voice. Waiting. Smiling. Holding the fader between its fingers like a judge, deciding which parts of you to mute next. And somewhere, under all the distortion, under all the silence, under every replayed interview and forgotten verse, Pac's still whispering, "Let me out." And I don't know what happens if I ever say yes. But I know I'm close. Because last night, the red light blinked again. Twice.